Today we're diving into a really bold new framework for how nations should interact. It comes from leading experts in a new field of science, and their argument is simple. The world's major powers have to shift from a path of confrontation to one of cooperation. So let's break down their argument.
Right off the bat, the analysis starts with a serious warning. The experts behind this new science are saying that the path we're on right now, especially between the US and China, is a huge mistake. They argue that a hot war isn't just some remote possibility, it's actually the likely outcome. And look, this isn't presented as a political opinion. It's framed as a scientific conclusion that demands we change course, and fast.
All right, so here's our game plan for unpacking this big idea. First, we'll look at the dangerous miscalculation that's at the heart of today's policies. Then we'll explore what they mean by a new global consensus. After that, we'll see how cooperation could replace competition, we'll get into the science behind it all, and finally, we'll see how this reframes everything as a totally new kind of duel.
Okay, first up, let's really get to the bottom of this crisis. Why is the current approach considered such a fundamental error that it requires a whole new science to fix it?
So, the central idea here is that international relations just isn't a zero-sum game anymore. You know, in an age with the kind of military technology we have now, a confrontational mindset doesn't get you a win. It leads to mutual destruction. Continuing down this road is, according to this science, like watching a catastrophic mistake happen in slow motion.
So this whole thing scales up from being about just two countries to being a critical issue for all of us. The experts argue this isn't just about geopolitics, it's about a major turning point for our entire species.
The argument here is really fascinating. They say humanity is at an evolutionary checkpoint, the end of what they call its infancy. Kind of like a teenager who suddenly gets a lot of power, but not a lot of wisdom. We have the ability to cause our own destruction. So the job ahead has two parts. First, survive this incredibly risky stage, and second, actually mature and grow beyond it.
So what does that maturity actually look like? Well, it needs a new global agreement built on three principles that are basically non-negotiable. First, the idea of war between major powers is just completely outdated. It's obsolete. Second, we have to make a conscious effort to evolve past this childish, conflict-driven phase. And third, we have to change our culture so we stop celebrating and rewarding people who push for war. We have to take away the honor and the profit that comes from it.
With that foundation laid, the framework then zooms right in on what is arguably the most critical relationship in the world today, and it proposes a radical change to how it works. What's being proposed here completely flips the old model on its head. See, where confrontation and competition used to be the main drivers, this new framework puts cooperation as the #1 priority. Now, competition doesn't just vanish. Instead, it changes into what's called benevolent competition. It becomes a kind of race to see who can do a better job of solving their own problems at home. Now, you might be sitting there thinking, is this even realistic? Well, according to this analysis, the answer is yes. The groundwork is already in place. Both the US and China, at their very core, have ideologies rooted in serving their own people and, by extension, all of humanity. And just as important, both nations have incredibly brilliant, visionary people who have the ability to rise above the noise of the warmongers and actually design a peaceful way forward.
Okay, so we've got the what, cooperation over competition. But how on earth do we actually make that happen? This is where we get into the core method of this new science.
The key concept here is something called the thinking function. You can think of it as the collective cognitive and psychological health of a country's population. And here's the groundbreaking claim. This isn't just some vague, abstract idea. It's a real variable that can be measured scientifically, by looking at things like crime rates, social trust, and public mental health, and then it can be systematically improved.
And this is exactly how it all ties back to that idea of benevolent competition. Each nation uses this science to improve the thinking function of its own people. So, by turning these scientific methods inward to focus on their own domestic well-being, the whole nature of competition shifts from being about dominating others to being about internal health and stability.
So, what would this actually look like in practice? Well, for the United States, applying this science could mean focusing on things like lowering crime rates and improving the quality of jobs to really strengthen the foundations of its democracy. For China, it could mean working to make sure its citizens' thinking is healthy and to stabilize the national mood, which would make it a more reassuring presence on the world stage. Each side works on improving itself, and everyone benefits.
This all leads us to the final and maybe the most powerful reframing of this entire relationship.
This isn't about just trying to avoid a fight. It's about starting a completely different kind of contest.
The experts actually call this new dynamic a duel. But, and this is the most important part, it is not the kind of duel you're probably picturing. It's not a duel fought with weapons aimed at each other. It's a contest of self-improvement, of social progress, and of wisdom. It's a race to see who can become the best version of themselves.
And the stakes of this duel? Well, they could not be higher. The winner won't be the country that dominates the other one. The winner will be the nation that figures out how to solve its own problems so well that it becomes a model for the rest of the world. The prize is literally leading all of humanity into a new stage of maturity, to finally get us on the right side of history.
So, in the end, this whole framework leaves us with a provocative challenge. The theory is there, the roadmap has been laid out, and the only question that's left is the one you see right here. Who will be the first to actually use this new science?